Welcome back, Arkham fans, to another Miskatonic AV Club, a Mythos Busters production, where we review the player cards and probably get them all wrong. With me today is a man you may know from our Discord, Mr. Delarp Guy, or Josh. Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing good. Are you ready to look at a bunch of cards and then be told we're wrong in about 2 months when newer cards come out that make them amazing?
Absolutely. I am wrong constantly, so I'm used to that.
Awesome. So today we're looking at Echoes of the Past, which was the first pack coming out in the Carcosa cycle. It was an interesting pack because it had a lot of similar cards, but I like to cherish it closely because it was the first Carcosa pack. Josh, you want to read the first card? A little cherished keepsake.
Absolutely. One of my favorites out of this particular pack. So, Cherished Keepsake. Zero cost, has a willpower pip. Mr. Potterson always told Wendy things would turn out okay. But then again, Mr. Potterson was a teddy bear and he didn't know any better. Accessory slot, 2 horror. Really can't go wrong with this one.
Yeah, it's an item and a charm, and I mean it fits right alongside Leather Coat, right? And Survivor's got these awesome opportunities to put in some extra health and sanity at zero cost. I think if you're playing a super tanky Yorick who's going to be fighting all the bad guys, this and Leather Coat are great because you can just keep on bringing them back out. Really great for a great splash in the Carcosa cycle, which just hammers you on sanity in anyone that can take Survivor, really.
It is also phenomenal in Calvin now that we have him. Because, of course, you need lots of stuff to soak up horror and damage in him, and just being able to get that out quickly and no cost, it's kind of hard to go wrong.
Yeah, I think the only issue I ever have with it, really, and it's not really that big of an issue, is the accessory slot is starting to get really competitive. And sometimes I'm not sure I want to just use it for a horror soak. But that's the only downside I would say about the Cherished Keepsake. But it's a pretty minor downside. If you're playing that tanky investigator, you're probably okay using your accessory slot as sanity.
Yeah, and most survivors tend to fit well into that tanky role, so it's good for them.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to a Seeker card, just so all the listeners are aware too, we're going to keep all the composure talents kind of as one big discussion, and the desperate skills as one big discussion, just because they fit so well together. That's kind of the diagram of this show. Anatomical Diagrams, 1 cost event, it's Seeker, has a willpower pip and a combat pip, it's insight traded, and fast. Play during any investigator's turn, play if you have 5 or more sanity remaining. Choose a non-elite enemy at your location until the end of the active investigator's turn. That enemy gets +2 fight and +2 evade. They are just animals like any other. Or so we thought. This is actually a pretty decent card, I find. I mean, you have to choose which investigator you're going to put it in. Like, Daisy is great. Roland, not so much. But it's got good offensive and defensive capabilities, really.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I find it odd that it came out in Carcosa, considering how punishing that is to your sanity.
Mm-hmm.
I found it much more useful in Dunwich and Forgotten Age, but even still in Carcosa, it's a good early game play to help prevent some of that horrible thing that's going to happen to you.
Yeah, and I like that it sticks around for the whole turn. It's a 1 cost -2/-2 for the whole turn. It's not just for the next hit, the next evade, stuff like that. Yeah, and I like that it hits both fight and evade. It doesn't make you choose, so you do have that option of, yeah, I'll knock him down a bit and then maybe evade him as my third action. So next round I can finish him off.
Yeah. really the only thing that I think could be a little better on it is having a willpower icon on there seems a little odd for me. I kind
Mm-hmm.
of wish to keep in with the theme that it was an agility icon. Plus, as we know, seekers sometimes lack in the department of agility, so having that help would be a little nice.
It's true, and with higher ed, they're not usually sucking at willpower. So,
Yeah. Now, with that said, it's a pretty minor gripe for overall pretty useful card.
hmm a very supporty card, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think obviously use best if you are a seeker. Probably use best during maybe a guardian's turn when they're actually swinging for big damage, not you just trying to take out rats. But
hmm
this card actually goes really well with the next one if you want to read the Dusty Knuckles.
Normally I like getting rogue cards to read, but this one. So, 2 cost Knuckle Duster asset with a combat pip, item, weapon, melee, and illicit. Action to fight. This attack deals +1 damage. The attacked enemy gains retaliate for this attack. Up close and personal, just the way Naomi liked it. Single hand slot.
Sounds like a single
So-
garbage slot to me.
Yeah, fits nicely into my garbage can.
Yeah. I have put this in one deck, and it was my Safina Grief deck, because you can do damage to... You can swing at an enemy, and then the +1 damage still carries on to the investigator that is engaged with that enemy.
Yep.
But yeah, until we get a really... if we got a 5-fight rogue, kind of like a Mark equivalent, I could see this maybe being a one of, kind of similar to. It's almost like the rogue version of a Colt 45, except Colt is just a lot better. Yeah, it's tough.
I've tried to make this work in skids, and for anybody who plays skids regularly knows you can get some pretty high combat values on him, but it just lacks the consistency that it needs.
Yeah, and giving the enemy retaliate is that's the backbreaker to me, right?
Yep.
You miss an attack, whereas most other attacks you're like, oh, okay, well, whatever. This one, it can really ruin your day, especially if you're playing on hard or expert. I would never take this card. So.
Oh yeah.
Unfortunate. If you're using the Knuckle Duster, you may have to call for a heroic rescue. Is the Guardian card. 1 cost event. It's got a willpower pip and a combat pip. Spirit and tactic. Fast. Play when a non-elite enemy would attack another investigator at your location. Engage that enemy and resolve its attack against you instead. Then deal it 1 damage. This, I think, has a lot of uses, especially Mark and Calvin can both take this.
Mm-hmm. I've actually found it very useful in Calvin.
Yeah, being able to kind of tank that damage, which initially you want to get your stats up, and then also dealing a damage to an enemy. Pretty useful. And then with Mark, I mean, you're going to probably be able to kill the enemy, and if it does attack you, you're probably taking some damage, which means you're drawing a card.
Yep. I think this is a solid card. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's amazing or anything, but it is a solid multiplayer Guardian card, which I love that theming for Guardians of the I'm going to dive on the grenade for you.
Yeah. I think this seems to me to maybe be a one of in any deck that would take it. I don't know if I would see 2 of.
I agree. The only thing that I see as an issue with it, having played with it multiple times now, is just having to be at the same location with them.
Yeah.
That's, it feels sometimes like you're, following somebody around who's doing the actual work, which, granted, that's kind of what the tank does, but sometimes it makes for less than optimal turns.
Yeah. What do you think about this versus dodge?
Kind of depends on which investigator I'm playing. In general, I tend to prefer this just because testless damage.
That's fair.
Granted, I have started playing on hard a lot more, so testless damage and testless clues definitely mean a lot more.
Yes, they
But
do.
with that said, even on standard, anytime you can avoid a test, it's better.
That's fair. All right. You want to read the card that is still making rounds in a lot of Mystic decks?
Marie's best friend, David Renfield. 2 cost, asset, esteemed, something that I can't read.
Eschatologist? Eschatologist? I don't know.
That sounds a lot better than I could do.
Sure.
Intellect Pip, ally, patron. While David Renfield has at least 1 doom on him, you get +1 willpower. Fast, exhaust David Renfield. You may place 1 doom on David Renfield. Gain 1 resource for each doom on David Renfield. 2 health, 1 sanity, and of course the ally slot.
This guy makes money.
Yeah, he is just a phenomenal resource generator in the right deck. Mm-hmm. The downside of him, in my opinion, is you definitely have to build around him.
Yeah, I think you have to be able to. I think it's also scenario dependent, because if you only have like a 4 doom threshold, it's probably pretty risky to play him. But if you are on one of those scenarios that has like 10 or 12 doom thresholds, it's a lot easier to really bank up some cash with them. And also, you want to be able to get rid of him easily, because when you get close to that witching hour, it's time for David Renfield to go away. So you don't cut yourself short by 3 or 4 turns, I think.
Yep. Thankfully, I think realizing that potential issue, we're starting to see more tools coming out to Mystics that allow them to deal with their cards that are more of a liability than a benefit. Mm-hmm. So there are definitely options for that, thankfully. With that said, I kind of cracked a joke about it, but he does work well with Marie, for those of you who do have Marie. Because you get the extra action for having a doom on a card you control. The extra willpower is nice in her, and she is definitely one of the more resource-intensive Mystics, which is kind of saying something.
Yeah, and great pair.
You definitely can't count him out in those weird Ashcan Pete decks that are just resource generators.
Yeah, I saw one that was just ridiculous, and it's by like turn 3, he has 6 doom on him, and you have just more resources than you would know what to do with for the rest of the game. Being able to use Ashcan Pete's ability to discard a card and ready David Renfield and exhaust him again in the turn. First turn, you're making 3 resources. Second turn, you make 7. The next turn, you make 11, I think it is. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at 21 resources gained in 3 turns. That's ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. The things that you can do with this guy, if you are able to wrap your brain around the weird timing of him, is pretty solid. I've seen a couple of those Duke decks that are very combat focused and use Scrapper and him to just make sure that you always hit.
Yeah. So in this pack, we also got what people are calling the talent or composure skill boosters. I guess the composure ones, because they are limited to 1 composure in play per investigator, obviously. Each class got one, and everyone but Mystics is the same except for which skill it boosts. So for Survivor, they got Plucky, and you can spend a resource for +1 willpower, +1 intellect. Scientific Theory for Seekers, and that's intellect and combat, oddly enough. Moxie is for rogues with willpower and agility. Combat training for guardians, they got combat and agility. And then Mystic's a bit weird. Basically, during a skill test on a spell card, you can spend 1 resource, get +1 to your skill value for this test. So it's only on skill cards, but it's whatever that skill card is testing. Now, they all have 1 horror capacity on them. They all cost 1. They are all 1 XP, and they all have icons that match the icons they're boosting, except for the Mystic one, which has a willpower. In addition to all of that, all of them have the clause, non-direct horror must be assigned to grounded before it can be assigned to your investigator card. So these things can leave play really quickly, unless you have another horror soak that you're able to put on. Like, perfect example is Cherished Keepsake. Josh, what's your thought on these composure skills? They were kind of, I think this pack, people were like, oh, we kind of got 5 of the same card, but slightly different. Is there ones that stand out to you, or?
With these, I think they're pretty decent. I think the 2 standouts for me are Plucky and Moxie. Moxie gives rogues something that they desperately needed, the ability to pay money for willpower. So this, I've seen more and more rogue decks that are picking this up early as kind of an emergency button. For when you have those weird random encounter cards pop up that's, test willpower 5 or else kick yourself. It's kind of a way for rogues to have an easy out for the encounter cards they're not normally able to deal with very well. Plucky just gives them a easy boost for intellect, which is something that survivors can definitely struggle with sometimes. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I do think they're all good with the exception of grounded.
I think I should throw in, too, that they're all fast as well. So it doesn't cost you an action to throw them down. So you can actually throw them down during the card committing part of a skill test. Which is pretty awesome. I think Scientific Theory, I think, is a pretty weak one for me, because the issue is we have higher education in the card pool, and so the idea of the intellect boost for Seekers is just a non-bow for me. And the fact that it boosts combat, for the most part, Seekers aren't really doing combat things. I can see it kind of like you said as an emergency button, but the amount of times I think they're going to use it is slim to none, and it would be only for boosting combat and not for the intellect. So I kind of hard pass on Scientific Theory.
I think you'll only really see that in certain solo decks.
Mm-hmm. Now, combat training has the same skill boosters as physical training. What I don't see myself using combat training over physical training, and I didn't use physical training that much. I'm surprised they went with the exact same icons as a booster they already have, but
yeah, it was a little odd. I don't think it's bad by any means. I just think that more often than not, Guardians have better places to spend their XP.
Yeah. And then Grounded, yeah. The idea is cute. I like the idea of it. The fact that it can just be whatever. But when it's limited to skills, to spells. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it played in gym a few times, but never to great effect.
Yeah. So the other group of cards we got were the desperate skills. So they're all skills, 0 XP, and they're max 1 committed per skill test. And they all have the clause commit to a skill test only if you have 3 or fewer remaining sanity. We have Say Your Prayers with 4 willpower pips, Desperate Search with 4 intellect pips, Reckless Assault with 4 combat pips, and Run for Your Life with 4 agility pips. This is really interesting cards they brought out, especially because in Carcosa you're probably going to have lower sanity remaining, and if you have a few good sanity soaks, it's easy for you to get down to 3 or less, and then be able to use these and soak your sanity on other things.
Yeah, I agree. I think that a couple of these definitely shine over others, but it was, I think, good timing for when it came out early on in the Carcosa cycle, like you were saying, and has definitely worked out well in certain decks.
Yeah, I know Nick on the show. He's ranted and raved about his desperate Roland, because Roland is only, 2 sanity damage away from being desperate. Oftentimes he can use these skills to great effect. The other one I hear a lot about is Ashcan Pete, because he has Duke, who has 3 of his 7 sanity, essentially. Pete takes 1 sanity hit, and all of a sudden he's desperate. And he's got a huge soak in Duke. Plus, he's Survivor, so he can take Cherished Keepsake. Like, he can be desperate from the end of the first turn or second turn.
I ran a very, very effective Desperate Dark Horse Duke that I was able to get Desperate online pretty consistently at the end of the first turn. And at that point, you can just toss enough skills to make sure that you pass any test.
Mm-hmm. These are also really great in, spoiler alert, the last scenario of the campaign, of the Carcosa campaign.
Oh, yeah.
You'll be desperate. A lot.
In more ways than one.
Yes. So, do you have a card that you think won the pack? I think I know which one you're going to take, and I think I agree with you.
Honestly, there really were a lot of good choices from this, but personally, I've got to go with I've got to go with Cherished Keepsake.
Oh,
I know I know that was kind of unexpected. However, I have become a huge fan of Calvin, and a very big fan of Pete from the beginning. So that horror soak is great and free. It's just a great all around card.
Oh. I was actually thinking you were going to say David Renfield, because I think, to me, he's my favorite, even though I don't use him that often, but he's just got that combo potential that I love. Cherished Keepsake is a very close second for me, though.
Yeah, and Renfield is a very, very close second. The only thing preventing me from choosing that is how rarely I use him.
And I think if we had to choose a paper shredder card, we're going to go with Knuckle Duster.
I like my paper shredder more than that.
Fair enough. All right.
Yeah.
Fair.
Very, very rarely will I ever say that this game has a bad card, and that one I would say is bad.
Right on. Well, Josh, thank you for joining me on reviewing the player cards of Echoes of the Past. I believe we are going to head right on into Unspeakable Oath in a minute. So stay tuned. Thanks for joining us.